job came to me through a man named Del Hargrove, who used to do plumbing with my father back when both of them still had knees that worked. I hadn't seen Del in maybe 9 years, but he called me on a Tuesday in February because somebody had told him I'd lost the warehouse job. And Del was the kind of man who remembered debts even when nobody was keeping track of them. He said there was a position at a place out past the county line, an old printing concern that had been turned into something else, and that they needed a man who could be alone and not mind it. He said it like that exactly. A man who could be alone and not mind it. I told him I could do that. At the time, I believed it. I want to be honest about my situation, because if I'm not honest about that part, none of the rest of it makes sense. By that February, I was 4 months behind on the truck, and 1 month from being behind on rent. And the unemployment had been calculated by somebody who clearly had never tried to live on it. I'd been selling things. Not big things, not yet, but the kind of small things you sell when you're telling yourself you're just decluttering. A second toolbox, my grandfather's watch, which I'd sworn I'd never sell, sold for less than I paid for the boots I was wearing when I sold it. So when Del said the pay was $18 an hour, cash some weeks, check others, and that it was overnights with almost nothing to do, I didn't ask the questions a person should ask. I asked when I could start. The place was called the Velmont Transcription Facility, though the sign out front only said Velmont in faded green letters with the second L hanging crooked. And underneath that, in smaller letters, somebody had clearly added later, Records Retention Authorized Entry Only. It sat at the end of a service road off Route 9, past a closed garden center and a field that nobody mowed, a long, flat building the color of old teeth with a gravel lot that held exactly 3 cars when I pulled in and only 2 when I left every morning, which I noticed but didn't think about for a long time. I met a woman named Patrice for what they called orientation, though it was really just her walking me through a building that took less than 4 minutes to walk through and then sitting me down at a desk and explaining what I'd be doing. Patrice was somewhere in her 60s, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a cardigan she kept buttoned all the way up, even though the building ran warm. And she had the manner of somebody who had explained this exact thing many times and had stopped expecting it to make sense to anyone. The work, she said, was transcription verification. The company received handwritten documents, ledgers, logbooks, registers, personal records, that kind of thing. And somewhere during the day shift, people I would never meet typed those documents into the computer system. My job, on overnights, was to take the original handwritten document and the typed version and confirm they matched, line by line. If they matched, I initialed a verification slip and moved the document to the outbound bin. If they didn't match, I was to mark the discrepancy on a yellow form, set the document aside in a tray labeled Hold, and under no circumstances was I to correct anything myself. "You don't fix it," Patrice said. "You don't think you know better. You note what's different and you put it in the tray. That's the whole job. People make it complicated in their heads. Don't make it complicated in your head." I said that sounded easy enough. She looked at me over the glasses for a second and then she said, "It is easy. That's not the part that gets people." I should have asked what part got people. I didn't because the phone in her cardigan pocket buzzed and she answered it and walked off down the hall talking to somebody about a delivery. And by the time she came back, she'd moved on to showing me where the bathroom was, and where the breaker box was, and how to log the building temperature every 2 hours on a clipboard that hung by the front door. So the questions slid past, the way a lot of questions slid past in that place, because there was always something more immediate and more boring being put in front of you. The desk where I'd work sat in a room they called the floor, which was just a wide open space with maybe 12 workstations in it, though Only one was set up for use. The others had monitors that were unplugged or missing, chairs pushed in, a thin gray dust on the keyboards. My station had a desktop computer that ran an operating system old enough that I hadn't seen its startup sound in years. A desk lamp with a flickering tube, a wire tray for inbound, and a wire tray for outbound, and a third tray, slightly apart from the others, that said "Hold" in red marker on a strip of masking tape. There was a stapler, a box of black pens, a box of yellow discrepancy forms, and a pad of verification slips with my employee number already printed at the top. Which struck me as strange because I hadn't given anyone any information yet. When I mentioned it to Patrice, she said the numbers were just assigned by the seat, not the person, and that whoever sat there became 17 for as long as they sat there. I was 17. The man before me had been 17. I didn't ask about the man before me. That's another question that slid past. The first night I worked alone, which was apparently the way it would always be. Patrice left around 9, and there was a day shift supervisor named Coombs, whose name I saw on forms, but whom I wouldn't actually meet for almost 2 weeks. And there was a second overnight person somewhere in the building, a man named Adler, who worked what they called the back rooms, which I was told plainly and more than once were not my concern and not my access. The doors to the back rooms were at the far end of the floor, a set of double doors with a keypad and a small wired glass window that had been covered over from the inside with paper. Adler came through those doors twice that first night, once around midnight and once near 4, to use the bathroom and to refill a thermos at the water cooler. And both times he nodded at me and said nothing, and went back through the doors, and I heard the keypad beep and the lock catch. The work itself was exactly as dull as Patrice had promised. The inbound tray that first night held a stack of maybe 40 documents, each one paper-clipped to a printout of its typed version. The handwritten ones were all different. Some were on lined paper, some on what looked like accounting ledger sheets, some on the backs of forms from other businesses, one on the inside cover of a paperback book that had been carefully cut out. The handwriting ranged from beautiful to nearly unreadable. The content was mostly lists, names and dates, names and amounts, names and short notations I didn't understand, abbreviations and codes, the kind of shorthand that means everything to the person who wrote it and nothing to anyone else. My job was just to make sure the typed version said the same thing. So I read a line on the handwritten page. I found it on the printout. I checked it off with a pencil, and I moved to the next line. When I'd done the whole document and everything matched, I initialed a slip, clipped it to the front, and dropped the bundle in outbound. It took me about 6 minutes a document the first night because I was being careful. By the end of the first week, I could do one in under 3. I want to describe the building at night, because the building at night is most of what I remember from those early weeks, more than any single document. The heat ran constantly and unevenly, so that the floor was warm, and the hallway to the bathroom was cold. And the little break alcove with the coffee maker was somewhere in between, and always smelled faintly of scorched coffee that nobody had brewed. The fluorescent lights on the floor were fine, except for one panel above the empty workstations that buzzed and stuttered. And I asked about getting it fixed, and Patrice said it had been on the list for a long time. And I came to understand that the list was a place things went to not get fixed. The coffee maker made coffee that tasted like the inside of the pot, which is to say like hot water that had given up. There was a vending machine by the front door that only took exact change and only had 3 things in it, all of them stale. And I ate a lot of those stale peanut butter crackers in those weeks because 18 an hour is better than nothing, but it is not enough to be picky. The smell I remember most was in the hallway between the floor and the back rooms. It was a paper smell, but not a clean one. Old paper. The slightly sweet, slightly sour smell of documents that have been kept too long in a place that's too warm. Underneath it, there was something else I could never name. Something like the inside of a coat closet, like wool and dust and skin. I told myself it was just the building. Old buildings have smells. I'd worked in a warehouse for 6 years, and that had smelled like diesel and cardboard and rat poison, and you stop noticing. I figured I'd stop noticing this too. I didn't exactly, but I learned to breathe through my mouth in that hallway, which is its own kind of not noticing. The first anomaly, if I can even call it that, was so small I almost didn't write it down. It was my 4th or 5th night. I was working through the inbound stack, and I came to a document that was a list of names with dates next to them, written in a tight, slanted hand on graph paper. I was checking it against the printout, line by line, and everything matched, until the second to last line. The handwritten page had a name. I remember it was a name like Halloway or Holloway. I genuinely can't recall which is part of the problem. My memory of those nights is good for the things I wish I could forget, and bad for the things I'd give anything to be sure of. And next to it, a date. The printout had the same name and the same date, but the printout had one extra line at the very bottom that the handwritten page did not have. Another name, another date. I sat there and I counted the lines twice. The handwritten page had 19 lines. The printout had 20. Now, the rule was clear. If they don't match, you mark the discrepancy on a yellow form and you put it in the hold tray. So that's what I should have done, and that's what I started to do. I pulled a yellow form, and I started writing the document number, and I started to note the extra line. And then I stopped, because I thought about Patrice saying, "You don't fix it, you don't think you know better." And I thought about how on my first week, I really did not want to be the new guy who flooded the hold tray with discrepancies that turned out to be his own mistakes. So I counted the lines a third time. And the third time, the handwritten page had 20 lines. I'm not going to pretend that's a supernatural event. I'm a tired man, working overnights on bad coffee, reading tiny slanted handwriting on graph paper under a flickering lamp. I miscounted. That's the only sane way to read it, and it's probably the true way to read it. And I held on to that explanation for a long time. The name was there on the handwritten page. When I looked the third time, in the same tight slant as all the others. The same blue-black ink, no different. It matched the printout. So it matched. I checked it off. I initialed the slip. I put it in outbound. I didn't mark anything on a yellow form. The first time, I told myself, I just lost my place. But I did write something in my own notebook. I should explain the notebook because it matters later. And because it's the one thing in this whole account that's entirely mine. I keep a small notebook on every job. A habit from the warehouse where if you didn't write down what you'd done, somebody would swear you hadn't done it. Just a cheap spiral thing. The kind they sell at gas stations. And I'd jot down what I'd worked on, and any problems, and the building temperature, and sometimes just stupid things. The score of a game, what I'd eaten. So on that 4th or 5th night I wrote, in my own hand, miscounted lines on doc, thought 19, was 20. Tired. And I underlined tired because I was, and because I wanted to remember to sleep more during the day, which I never did. That notebook is in front of me now. I can read that line. Miscounted lines on doc, thought 19, was 20. Tired. It's my handwriting. I know it's my handwriting. I'm telling you that because of what the notebook does later, and because I need you to understand that at the start, I was just a man writing down that he'd been tired. The routine settled in fast, the way routines do when you need the money. I'd get there a little before 9. Patrice, or sometimes nobody, would be there. I'd take the temperature reading and log it. I'd sit down at station 17, and I'd work the inbound stack. Some nights it was 30 documents. Some nights 100. Around 2, I'd take what I called lunch, which was the crackers and a coffee. And I'd sit in the break alcove and look at my phone, which got almost no signal out there. One bar that came and went, so mostly I'd just reread old messages and look at the time. Then back to the floor, finish the stack, and by 5 or 6, the inbound tray was usually empty. And I'd do the closing log, note the temperature one more time, and wait for the gray light to come up in the high windows and for the day to start so I could leave. Adler I saw most nights, always the same way, the keypad, the nod, the silence, the keypad again. I tried to talk to him exactly once in my second week. He was filling his thermos, and I said something about the heat being uneven, and he looked at me for a second too long and said, "You like it here?" Not unfriendly, just flat. I said it was fine. It was a job. He nodded and said, "Keep it that way," and went back through the doors. And I stood there feeling like I'd failed a test I hadn't known I was taking. I didn't try to talk to him again for a while. Patrice I saw at the start of most shifts for a few minutes, and she'd give me little additions to the procedure, little rules, always delivered in that same been-through-this-before voice, never explained, just stated. I started to keep track of them in the notebook because there were enough of them that I worried I'd forget one and get blamed. I'll list them the way I had them, because the way they accumulated is part of what I want you to feel. The first one, of course, was the main one. Verify line by line, mark discrepancies on the yellow form, put mismatches in hold, never correct anything yourself. The second one she gave me my second night. Always work the inbound stack top to bottom, in the order it's stacked, and never skip a document to come back to it. If a document is giving you trouble, finish it before you move on. I asked why, and she said it was so nothing got lost, which made sense, so I didn't push. The third one came a few nights later. If a document has no typed version clipped to it, if it's just the handwritten original, alone, I was not to verify it, not to read it closely, just to note its document number on a separate green form, and put it directly in the hold tray. "You don't read those," I said, and she said, "You note the number. That's all you do." And there was something in how she said it, a slight extra weight, that made me file it differently in my head than the other rules. The fourth one was about the hold tray itself. I was never to take anything out of hold, only put things in. Whatever went in hold was for the day shift, or for Coombs, or for the back rooms. I was never clear which. But it was not mine to touch again once it was in there. Fine. The fifth one she gave me almost as an afterthought, near the end of my second week, standing by the front door with her coat already on. She said, "If you ever find a document with your own employee number on it, you don't verify it, you don't mark it, you don't put it in hold. You leave it in inbound, and you call the number on the wall, and you wait." There was a number on the wall by the door, a phone number on a laminated card, and I'd never thought to wonder why it was there. I said, "Why would a document have my number on it?" And she said, "It won't. I'm just telling you because I have to tell you. It's on the list of things I have to tell you." And she left. "It's on the list of things I have to tell you." I wrote that down. I underlined it. I don't know why I underlined it. Something in me knew to underline it. So that was 5 rules, and they were boring, every one of them, the way rules at any job are boring. And if you'd asked me in week 3, I'd have told you the strangest thing about the place was the smell in the hallway, and the man who answered, "You like it here," like a threat. The documents were just lists. The work was just checking. The pay cleared, mostly on time, and I caught up 1 month on the truck, and the relief of that was so large that it crowded out almost everything else. You don't look too hard at the thing that's keeping you afloat. But the small things kept happening, and I kept writing them in the notebook. And looking back at the notebook, now I can see the curve of it. The way a thing that you're telling yourself is nothing slowly becomes a thing you're writing down every night. There was the matter of the dates. The documents I verified were almost all undated as documents. I mean, the lists had dates next to the names, but the documents themselves, when they came in, didn't have a received date stamp the way you'd expect in any filing operation. I asked Coombs about it when I finally met him, and Coombs was a heavy, tired man who clearly resented being at the building at all, and answered most questions with a shrug. He said the dates didn't matter for verification, just match the lines. But I noticed over a few weeks that the dates next to the names were getting more recent. The first documents I verified had dates from years back, decades in some cases. By week 4, I was seeing dates from a few years ago. By week 6, I saw a date that was only a few months old. And then one that was that same month, and I remember sitting up a little straighter at that. A name with a date next to it that was last week, written in old slanted handwriting on a ledger sheet that smelled like it had been in a warm closet for 50 years. I checked it against the printout. It matched. I initialed the slip. I put it in outbound. I wrote in the notebook, "Dates getting current." Ledger looks old, but date is recent. How? Just that one word at the end. I didn't even put a question mark. There was the matter of the outbound bin. I put documents in outbound all night, and in the morning the bin was emptied by the day shift, and I never saw who did it or when. But one morning, I was running late on the closing log, and I was still there when the day people started coming in. And a young woman I'd never seen took the outbound bin and carried it not toward the front, not toward any kind of mailroom or shipping area, but back toward the rear doors, the keypad doors, Adler's doors. And she punched in a code and went through. The verified documents, the matched ones, the ones I'd initialed, they went into the back rooms. The same place the unread originals went. The same place the hold tray went. Everything went to the back rooms. I'd assumed verified documents were being sent somewhere, returned to whoever owned them, archived in some normal sense. But they weren't going out. Nothing went out. The only thing that ever left that building was the people, and one fewer car left in the morning than had been there at night, which I finally let myself notice, somewhere around week 6. 3 cars when I arrived, mine and 2 others. 2 cars when I left in the morning, mine and 1 other. And it wasn't that someone was leaving during the night. I'd have heard a car on that gravel. The lot was right outside the windows. It was that one of the cars that was there at night was simply not there in the morning. And I never saw it leave. And I never saw anyone get into it. And when I tried to keep an eye on it one night, the night I decided I'd watch it, I got busy with a heavy inbound stack. And when I looked up at 4, it was gone. And I hadn't heard a thing. I told myself there was a side lot. I told myself there was a back exit by the rear doors, and people parked around there, and I'd just gotten my count wrong. I never confirmed any of that. I never walked the perimeter to check. And I want to be honest that I never walked the perimeter to check, because some part of me did not want to find out that there was no side lot. That's the kind of man I am, or was, or became out there. The kind who'd rather keep a comfortable maybe than confirm a bad fact. I think the building knew that about me. I think that's part of why it kept me. The first thing that I couldn't fully rationalize, the first thing that moved from the column of "I'm tired" into the column of "something is actually wrong here," happened in my 7th week. And it happened with the green forms. The green forms, remember, were for documents that came in without a typed version, just the handwritten original alone. I didn't read those. I noted the document number on a green form and put them in hold. They came in rarely, maybe one a week, sometimes none. And I'd been good about the rule. I hadn't read them. I just noted the numbers, because the way Patrice had said it had stuck with me. But on this particular night, there was an original alone in the inbound stack, no printout clip to it. And as I picked it up to note its number, I saw that it wasn't a list. The other documents were always lists, names and dates and amounts. This one was a single page of continuous handwriting, like a letter or a journal entry. In a hand I recognized, not because I knew the person, but because I'd seen that exact slant before. The tight blue-black slant from the graph paper document way back on my 4th or 5th night. The one where I'd miscounted the lines. The same hand. And I know that doesn't prove anything. Plenty of people write with a slant. But you read enough handwriting under a lamp at 3 in the morning, and you start to know hands the way you know voices, and this was the same hand. I wasn't supposed to read it. I noted the document number on a green form. And then I read it anyway, because I'm a curious man, and a weak one, and because 7 weeks of lists had made me hungry for a sentence, any sentence, and because there's only so long you can do a thing while being told not to understand it before you start to understand it out of spite. It was short. I'm going to give it to you as close to exactly as I can, because I read it maybe 4 times before I put it in hold. And I copied it into my notebook that same night, so I have it close to the right. It said, "They will tell you to note the number and not to read it. The reason they tell you not to read it is that the ones with no typed copy are the ones the typing hasn't caught up to yet. Once you've read it, you've started the typing. I'm sorry. I didn't know either. I was 17 before you. Count your stack when you come in and count it when you finish. If the count is wrong, it isn't the count." That was it. No name, no date. I sat there for a long time. I read it again. I read it a 4th time. The lamp flickered the way it always did. The heat ticked in the vents. Down the hall, the keypad on the back doors beeped. And I heard Adler come out. And I did something I hadn't done before, which is that I shoved the green form and the original under a folder on my desk, fast, so he wouldn't see what I was looking at. And I picked up a regular document and pretended to verify it while he filled his thermos. He looked at me. He always looked at me. He said, "Slow night?" And I said, "Yeah, slow." And he stood there a second longer than he needed to, and then went back through the doors. When the lock caught, I pulled the original back out. I want to tell you that I followed the rule then, that I put it in hold like I was supposed to. And I did eventually, that same night. I put it in hold with its green form because I was scared of what would happen if it was found anywhere else. But first, I copied the whole thing into my notebook, word for word, and I sat with it for the rest of the shift. And the line I kept coming back to wasn't the part about the typing, which I didn't understand and didn't want to. And it wasn't the part about being sorry. It was, I was 17 before you, because I was 17. The number was assigned to the seat, Patrice had said, not the person. Whoever sat there became 17. The man before me had been 17. And he had sat in this chair, at this desk, under this flickering lamp. And at some point, he had written that note, in the same hand as a document I'd verified in my first week. A document with names and dates that I had checked off and initialed and sent into the back rooms. I went looking after that. Not far, not bravely. I went through the desk drawers, which I'd never fully gone through, because they were full of the previous person's leftover junk. And I'd just shoved my own things in around it. And in the bottom drawer, under a layer of dead pens and a half-eaten roll of antacids and a phone charger for a phone that no longer exists, I found a notebook. A cheap spiral notebook, gas station kind. The same kind I use. I want to be clear that this is a common notebook. You can buy it anywhere. It doesn't prove anything that we use the same kind. But my hands went cold when I saw it, and I sat back down in the chair before I opened it, because some part of me already knew. The handwriting inside was the tight blue-black slant, the same hand as the note, the same hand as the graph paper list from week 1. It was a work notebook, like mine, building temperatures, document counts, little frustrations. Coffee maker still broken. Coombs is useless. 40 docs tonight. Light. It was so ordinary, so much like my own notebook, that for a few pages I felt almost calm, almost like I'd just found a co-worker's diary, dull and human. He complained about the heat. He complained about Adler. He'd written down a recipe for chili that somebody must have told him. He'd kept score of games I'd never heard the outcomes of. And then, maybe 2/3 of the way through, the entries changed. They got shorter. They stopped being about the building and started being about the documents. Dates are getting current, one said. I read that and I had to put the notebook down on the desk and breathe, because I'd written almost exactly that same thing. Dates getting current. In my own notebook weeks earlier, sitting in this same chair, not knowing a man before me had written it too. A few pages later, counted 41 in, did 41, but 42 went to outbound. Checked twice. The extra one had a name on it I keep almost knowing. And a few pages after that, the last entries, the handwriting getting worse, faster, pressing harder into the paper. Asked Patrice about the green forms. She said it's on the list of things she has to tell me. I'm starting to think the list is the whole job. The list isn't rules for me. The list is the building telling me what it's going to do. The very last entry in his notebook was 3 lines, and they were the only 3 lines on the page. And after them, the rest of the notebook was blank, maybe 60 empty pages. It said, I found my own number on a document tonight. I'm going to call the number on the wall like she said. If you're reading this, you're the next 17. Count your stack. And then, under that, in handwriting that barely held together, smaller than all the rest, like he'd written it last and from very close to the page. Don't call the number on the wall. I sat in that chair with 2 notebooks in front of me, his and mine. The same cheap kind, the same gas station spiral. And I noticed I couldn't help noticing that his handwriting and mine had started to look alike. The slant of it, the way the letters leaned. I told myself that was nothing, that everybody's handwriting drifts, that I was a tired man finding patterns in the dark the way tired men do. I closed his notebook. I put it back in the bottom drawer, under the dead pens, exactly where I'd found it, because I didn't know what else to do with it, and because leaving it there felt safer than taking it home. Though I couldn't have told you why. Then I picked up my own notebook to write down the date and what I'd found, the way I write down everything, because that's the one thing I'd done every single night, without fail. The one normal habit I had left in that place. I opened to the page where I'd left off, the page from the night before, and I went to start a new line. But there was already a new line there. Under my last entry, in the space I'd left blank, there was an entry I had not written. It was in my handwriting. I know my own handwriting. It was mine, the same as the line above it that I knew I'd written. The same pen, the same hand, no different at all. It said, "Counted 44 inches. Don't read the originals. You already started one." And below that, where I'd been about to put tonight's date, the page had one more line, and the ink on it was still faintly wet, catching the light from the lamp so that I could see it had been written there, not hours ago, but in the last few minutes, while the notebook sat closed on my desk, and I held another dead man's diary in my hands. It said, "Count your stack." So I did. My hands needed something to do, and counting was something to do. And I told myself it was just to prove the entry wrong, to prove I was tired, to prove the lamp and the smell and the hour had gotten into my head. I walked to the inbound tray. Earlier that night, at the start of the shift, I had counted the stack the way I always did, out of habit, and I had written the number down, and the number had been 38. I had done some of them already, maybe a dozen, so there should have been around 26 left in inbound, give or take, plus the dozen in outbound. Simple arithmetic. Nothing in the world should have changed that. I counted the inbound stack. Then I counted it again, slower, moving each document one at a time, from one side of the desk to the other, the way you count money when it matters. There were 44. 44. I want to tell you that I did something sensible with that number, that I picked up the phone or got in my truck, or at least sat down and thought it through like a reasonable man. What I actually did was count a third time, because the thing your mind does when it sees something it can't hold is to make you do the same small action over and over, as if the right answer is hiding under the wrong one and you just have to keep lifting the corner. I counted a third time and got 44 again. And then I stood there in the warm room with the buzzing panel over the empty desks, and I felt the whole night tilt very slightly, the way a floor feels when you've stood up too fast. Then I did the most cowardly and human thing available, which is that I told myself I'd been wrong at the start of the shift. Not now, earlier. I told myself I'd written down 38 when the stack had really been heavier, that I'd counted fast, that I'd been thinking about the truck payment and miscounted by 6. It's an ugly little trick, but it works, because you can't argue with a number you wrote down hours ago. The past version of you is gone and can't defend himself. So I decided the past version of me had been careless, and I picked up the top document and I started verifying it, because the inbound tray doesn't care what you've discovered. The inbound tray just gets heavier. But I didn't write the count in my notebook. That's the part I want to be honest about. I had a habit every night of writing the count, and that night I didn't, because the notebook had a line in it I hadn't written, and I didn't want to open it again. I left it closed on the corner of the desk all night, and I worked around it. And a couple of times I caught myself glancing at it the way you'd glance at a dog you weren't sure about. I got through the stack by morning. I always got through the stack. Whatever number it really was, I verified every document, initialed every slip, dropped every bundle in outbound. And here's the thing I noticed at the end. When the gray light came up in the high windows and I was doing the closing log, the outbound bin was fuller than it should have been. I'd done a normal night's work, the kind of night where I'd expect maybe 60 bundles in outbound. And there were more than that. I didn't count them. I want to be clear that I deliberately did not count them, because I'd already learned that the counting was the part that got you. And some animal part of me had decided that if I didn't count, it couldn't be wrong. That's not logic. I know that's not logic. But that's the deal I started making with the place around then. The deal where I'd do the work and not look at the edges of it. And the place seemed fine with that deal. The place, I came to understand, preferred that deal. I drove home that morning with the heater going in the truck and the radio off, and I thought about quitting. I thought about it the way you think about a vacation you can't afford, as a pleasant thing that exists in some other man's life. I had the truck mostly caught up. I had rent covered for the first time in months. Dell had stuck his neck out to get me the job. And Dell was the kind of man who'd take it personal if I walked off after 8 weeks, with no explanation. And I didn't have an explanation. What was I going to say? The notebook writes itself. The stack counts wrong. There's a smell in the hallway. None of it survived being said out loud in the daylight. By the time I'd slept and woken up at 3 in the afternoon to the sound of my upstairs neighbor's TV, the whole thing had shrunk back down to the size of a job I didn't love. That's the worst part of how it worked. It let you forget during the day. It only added up at night. I went back. Of course I went back. I went back the next night, and the night after that. And I kept my deal: do the work, don't count, don't read. And for about a week, it held. The dates on the documents kept creeping forward. I'd stopped letting myself really read the dates, but you can't help seeing them. And one night, I saw a date that was the next day. Not a past date, not today. Tomorrow's date, next to a name, in old ink on an old ledger sheet, verified against a printout that matched it line for line. I initialed the slip. My hand did it before my head could object, because by then my hand had gotten very good at the job, and my head had gotten very good at being somewhere else. Patrice gave me a 6th rule that week, and this is where the rules stopped being boring, although she delivered it in the same flat voice as all the others. Coat already on, hand already on the door. She said, if the closing log and the opening log don't match, if the temperature you wrote at the start of your shift isn't there when you go to close, don't write it in again. Leave the line blank and initial the blank. I said, what do you mean if it isn't there? I write it. It's there. And she said, some nights the opening reading changes. You'll see. When it does, you leave the closing line blank. You don't try to make them agree. Making them agree is how you get noticed. And she opened the door, and the cold came in off the gravel, and she was gone. And I stood there with the clipboard. And I went and looked at the opening log I'd filled in 2 hours earlier. I'd written 71 at 9 o'clock. I remembered writing it. The line now said 68. Same pen, same hand, same little way I crossed my 7s. 68. I stood there holding the clipboard, and the heat ticked in the vents, and I had understood for the first time, all the way down, that the building wasn't haunted in the way a house is haunted. A haunted house has a ghost in it, something extra, something that got in. This was different. This was the building doing its actual job. And I was a part of the machinery, and the machinery did not malfunction. It functioned. The wrongness was the function. I left the closing line blank that night, like she'd said, and I initialed the blank. And I felt doing it like I was signing something much larger than a temperature log. It was around then that Adler started talking to me. Not much. But he'd come out of the back rooms at midnight, and instead of just filling his thermos and nodding, he'd stand at the water cooler a minute, and he'd say things. The first thing he said that wasn't a test was, "You found his book yet?" Not even a question the way he said it. I didn't pretend not to know what he meant. I said, yeah. He nodded like I'd confirmed a delivery. He said, don't take it home. They get funny if it leaves. I asked, who's they? And he just looked at me with those flat, tired eyes and said, how long you been here? 8 weeks, I said. He said, he lasted 14 and went back through the doors, and I sat with that for the rest of the night. 14 weeks. I was past the halfway mark of a dead man's whole career. I started watching Adler after that, the few times I could see him. He'd been there a long time. Years, I gathered, though I never got a straight number. He didn't seem afraid the way the notebook man had been afraid at the end. He seemed like a man who'd made peace with something by deciding not to look at it, which I recognized, because it was the same peace I was making, just further along. One night, I asked him straight out, "What's back there? What's in the back rooms?" And he didn't get angry, and he didn't refuse. He just said, "Storage." And when I kept looking at him, he added, "It's all storage. The whole place is storage. You think you're checking the books against the typing. You're checking the typing against the books. You've got it backwards. We all had it backwards at first." And that was the most anyone ever explained it to me. And I've turned it over 1,000 times since. And I think I finally understand it. And I wish I didn't. We had it backwards. I thought the handwritten documents were the originals, the real record, the thing that happened, and the typing was a copy being made for the files. Verify that the copy matches the original. Normal office work. But Adler said it was the other way. The typing was the real thing. The typing was what the day shift produced, somewhere back there, in the rooms I never saw. And the handwritten documents, the old ledgers, the graph paper, the ink that looked 50 years old. Those were what the building produced to match. The building wrote the originals, after the fact, to make the typing true. That's what verification was. I wasn't confirming that a record was accurate. I was confirming that reality had caught up to the file. And when it matched when I initialed the slip, it was done. It had happened. The name and the date were real now, because 2 pieces of paper agreed, and a tired man had signed that they agreed. I didn't get all of that from Adler. I got the seed of it from Adler, and the rest of it from the documents themselves over the following weeks. Because once you understand the shape of a thing, you start seeing it everywhere. And I couldn't unsee it. The dates getting current, the dates reaching tomorrow, the names. I started, against every rule and every instinct, to read the names. Really read them. And one night, in my 11th week, I read a name I knew. It was a woman named Carol Heddle, and she'd been a teller at the bank branch by my old apartment, the one I'd closed my account at when I moved. I didn't know her well. I knew her enough to say her name back when she said mine off my card. Enough to know she had a son in the army because she had a flag pin and a hard time around certain holidays. Carol Heddle, in old slanting ink on a ledger sheet, with a date next to it that was 4 days out. I sat there with the document in my hand, and I did not initial the slip. I held it. I thought about Carol Heddle's flag pin. And then I did the thing I'd been avoiding for 11 weeks, the thing the notebook man had warned me not to do, and the thing every cell in my body was telling me to do, which was that I decided to interfere. I didn't have a plan. That's the embarrassing truth. I just couldn't put my initials on Carol Heddle. So I marked a discrepancy on a yellow form, even though the document matched the printout perfectly. And I wrote in the discrepancy field, in my own hand, name appears in error. And I put it in the hold tray. I told myself hold was where things went to not happen, that the unread originals went to hold, and nothing seemed to come of them. That maybe hold was a way out for Carol Heddle. I felt briefly like a decent man. It was the first time in 11 weeks I'd felt like a decent man. And I held on to it on the drive home. And I told myself I'd found a loophole, a way to do the job and still keep my hands clean, flag a name here and there, slip a few people out the back. Carol Heddle's obituary ran in the county paper that Friday. 4 days out, the date had said. She died on the date. Heart, the obituary said, sudden at home. The hold tray hadn't saved her. The hold tray wasn't a way out. I sat in my truck in the gravel lot that next night before my shift, and I read the obituary on my phone 3 times, the signal coming and going. And I understood that I had it backwards again. Hold wasn't where things went to not happen. Hold was where things went that hadn't been finished yet, the unfinished, the in progress, the ones the building was still working on. By flagging Carol Heddle and putting her in hold, instead of initialing her and sending her to outbound, I hadn't pulled her out of the machine. I'd just moved her from one part of it to another. Maybe I'd even made it worse. Maybe initialing her clean would have given the date a chance to be wrong. I'll never know. That's the thing this place did best. It made sure you'd never know whether the thing you did to help was the thing that hurt. I went in. I had to go in because the alternative was sitting in the lot all night. And because if I stopped going in, I'd have to admit what going in meant. Patrice was there, unusually, at 11 o'clock, which I'd never seen. She was standing by my desk when I came onto the floor, and she had the yellow form in her hand, the Carol Heddle one, and she put it down on the desk in front of me and tapped it once with one finger. She said, "You wrote appears in error." I didn't say anything. She said, "There's no error. The document matched. You know it matched. You flagged a clean document because you knew the name." It wasn't a question. I still didn't say anything. She looked at me over the reading glasses, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was something almost kind in her face, which was worse than anger would have been. She said, "I did that once. Early. You think you're the first person to recognize a name and try to be a hero. The flag doesn't stop it. Nothing you can do from that chair stops it. The only thing the flag does is tell them you've started reading the names. And once they know you're reading the names, they start showing you the names they want you to read." I asked her who they were. I'd asked Adler and gotten, "They get funny." And I asked Patrice, and she did a thing I'll never forget, which is that she glanced, very briefly, at the back doors, the keypad doors, and then back at me, and she said, "I don't go back there. I've worked here 19 years and I've never been back there, and I would like to keep it that way, and so would you." 19 years. She picked up the Carol Heddle form and she carried it herself, with her own hands, back to the keypad doors. And she punched in a code I couldn't see, and she opened the door just wide enough to put the form through, set it on something just inside, I couldn't see what, and pulled the door shut and let the lock catch. She didn't go in. 19 years, and she didn't go in. She came back and put her coat on, and at the door she said, "Do the work. Don't read the names. It's easier if you don't read the names." And she left, and I never saw her again. I want to say that clearly because it matters. After 19 years, that was the last night Patrice came in. There were 2 cars in the lot when I'd arrived that night. There was one when I left. I should have quit. I want you to know that I know I should have quit. But I'd just been told, in the gentlest possible way, that quitting wasn't a door that opened from the inside, and I just watched a 19-year veteran stop existing in the space of a shift. And I was 11 weeks in, with the truck nearly paid off, and 3 weeks short of the 14 that the last man had managed. And somewhere in the math of all that, I made the decision that I think the building had been waiting for me to make, which was to stop trying to be decent and just survive. Do the work. Don't read the names. It's easier if you don't read the names. I made that my whole religion. I got very good at not reading the names. I'd let my eyes go soft on the page so I could match the shapes of the lines without taking in the words, the way you can proofread for typos without absorbing the meaning. I matched shapes. I initialed slips. I sent bundles to outbound. The dates were all in the future now, every one of them, and I didn't read those either. I became, I think, exactly the worker the place wanted, which is one who is understood enough to be afraid and not enough to be dangerous. The notebook kept writing in it. I'd given up pretending it didn't. Some mornings I'd open it to log the night, and there'd be a line in my own hand that I hadn't written. And the lines were never dramatic. That was the awful part. They were practical, they were helpful. They were the kind of thing a slightly older and more frightened version of me would tell a slightly younger one. Don't initial past 4 a.m., the count gets soft after 4. Or Coombs lies about the Friday batch, do it Thursday. Or the one that I read maybe a dozen times, the one that I think about more than anything else from that whole stretch. He's going to come in. When he does, don't help him. I didn't know who he was. I noted it. I'd learned to note things. Noting things was the green form rule turned into a way of life. See it. Write the number. Don't read the meaning. Put it somewhere you don't have to look at it. He came in on a Tuesday, in my 13th week, in bad weather. The kind of cold rain that turns the gravel lot to a sheet of standing water. I heard a car on the gravel around 1 in the morning, which never happened. Nobody arrived at 1 in the morning. And I went to the front and looked through the glass, and there was a 4th car, a little hatchback I didn't recognize, and a man getting out of it in the rain, with his coat over his head. He came to the door and knocked, which also never happened. The door was always locked, and the people who belonged there had codes. I should have left him out there. The notebook had told me to leave him out there in my own future handwriting. But it was pouring, and he was just a man, a young guy, maybe 25, soaked through. And when I cracked the door, he said he was looking for his sister, that her car was in the lot, that she worked here, that she hadn't come home and hadn't answered her phone in 2 days, and the police wouldn't do anything for 72 hours. And somebody at the bank where she used to work said she'd taken a night job out on Route 9 and this was the only place out here. He said her name. I'm not going to give it. I'll just tell you that I knew the car he meant. It was the 2nd car, the one that was there when I arrived and gone when I left. The one I'd never seen anyone get into. The one I'd told myself parked in a side lot that didn't exist. I let him in. I want to be honest that I let him in. Partly because I was glad to see another human being who wasn't part of the machine, and partly because I was a coward in a different direction. I didn't have it in me to leave a soaked, frightened kid out in the rain, looking for his sister. So I let him in, and I gave him the bad coffee, and I told him I didn't know his sister, which was true. I'd never met her. And I told him I'd never seen her, which was a lie, because I think now I'd verified her. I think now her name had gone across my desk, and I'd matched the shape of it without reading it, the way I'd trained myself to. And that's a thing I'll carry. He sat in one of the empty chairs at one of the dead workstations, and he held the coffee and didn't drink it, and he asked me questions I couldn't answer. And the whole time, I was aware of the back doors at the end of the floor, the keypad, the paper over the glass. And I was aware that her car had been in that lot every single night I'd worked. Present at 9 and gone by morning, over and over. Which meant whatever happened to the 2nd car happened to her not once, but every night. On a loop. A thing the building did to her again and again. And I had counted that car going missing as a curiosity about parking. I didn't tell him any of that. Here's the worst part. He asked me, at one point, very directly, looking right at me, is there somewhere she could be in this building? Is there a part you can't get into? And I had the keypad doors 20 feet away, and Patrice's voice in my head saying, I have never been back there, and would like to keep it that way. And I had my own future handwriting saying, don't help him. And I sat there, and I said no. I said, it's all just storage back there. It's locked. There's nobody else. I've worked here 3 months, and I've never seen anybody but the regular crew. Every sentence of that was a thing I'd been told to say by people who'd survived by saying it. I handed him the building's own script, and I watched it work on him the way it had worked on me. Watched him want to believe it because believing it meant he could go home. And around 3 a.m, he did. He went home. He thanked me. He shook my hand, his hand cold from the coffee he never drank. And he said if I saw her, would I call him? And he wrote his number on a corner of a yellow discrepancy form, the only paper I had. And I said, of course. And he went out into the rain and got in his hatchback and drove off. And his sister's car was still in the lot. It was gone by morning. Of course it was gone by morning. And I had his number on a yellow form. And I will tell you exactly what I did with it. Because if I leave this part out, then the rest is just a man telling you about something that happened to him. And that's not what this is. This is a man telling you what he did. I put his number in the hold tray. I told myself it was so I wouldn't lose it. I told myself I'd call him if I learned anything. But the truth is, I knew the hold tray went back through the keypad doors into the storage that was all storage. And I knew now what hold was. The unfinished, the in progress, and some part of me, the part that had been doing this for 13 weeks and wanted to do it for many more, put that kid's name and number into the machine on purpose. Not because I wanted anything to happen to him, I swear that. But because keeping his number on my desk meant keeping the question on my desk. And I didn't want the question. I wanted to do the work and not read the names, and go home with the truck paid off. So I fed him to the tray to get him off my conscience. And the tray took him the way it took everything. And I want to be clear that I don't know what happened to him. That's not me sparing you. I genuinely don't know. The not knowing is the thing I bought with that choice. And it's a worse thing to own than a body would be, because a body you could at least be sure of. I almost quit then. The morning after, I sat in my truck in the wet gray light and I cried. Actually, which I hadn't done since my father's funeral. And I decided I was done. I'd call Dell. I'd make up something about my back. I'd never come back to Route 9. And I drove home and slept and woke up at 3. And the deciding had worn off the way it always did in daylight. And underneath it was the plain arithmetic that had run my whole life. Rent, the truck, the fact that I'd put Belmont transcription 3 months on no resume because there was no resume to put it on. The fact that men like Dell didn't get you a second favor. And there was something else by then. Something I'm ashamed of more than the money. I was used to it. The horror of the place had become my normal. The way the diesel smell of the warehouse had been my normal. You can get used to anything if you do it every night, and don't read the names. I went back. Coombs caught me on the floor about a week later, my 14th week, the week the last man hadn't survived past. He came in during my shift, which the day supervisor never did. Heavy and tired and damp from the rain that hadn't let up in days. And he sat down on the edge of my desk, which felt obscene, like a doctor sitting on your bed. And he said, "You're good at this." I said thanks, not knowing what else to say. He said, "No, I mean it. You don't ask questions anymore. You did it first. Everybody does it first. You stopped." He had a folder under his arm, and he set it on the desk, and he said, "We're moving you back." I said, "Back where?" He nodded at the keypad doors. He said, "The back rooms. Adler's getting moved up and out, and we need somebody who's solid. It's a raise. 26 an hour. All check. Benefits after 90 days. You'd be doing the typing instead of the verifying. Other end of the same job." Other end of the same job. The end where the originals got made. The end where reality got written to match the file, in old ink, on old paper, by a person sitting in a room I'd never seen, producing the documents that some new frightened man at Station 17 would verify by matching shapes and not reading names. I asked him what happened to people who said no. I'd learned to ask that one. He didn't get funny about it. He just looked at me with those heavy eyes, and he said, "Nobody back there said no. That's why they're back there." And he tapped the folder and stood up and said, "Think about it. Let me know by Friday. It's a good move. It's safer back there, honest. Out here, you're exposed." Exposed. He said it like a man saying it gets cold by the window. He left the folder. I opened it after he was gone. It was an employee file, my employee file, with my real name on it, which I'd somehow never seen the place use, and a new number printed at the top where my old verification slips had said 17. The new number was 6. And clipped to the inside where a photo would go, there wasn't a photo. There was a verification slip, blank, with employee number 6 printed at the top, and a document number, and a date. The date was 3 weeks out. I understood what I was looking at. I'd verified 100 documents that meant exactly this, names and dates in old ink, and I'd matched their shapes and not read them. And now, here was one with my number on it and a date 3 weeks in the future. And the 5th rule Patrice had given me on her way out the door 11 weeks earlier came back so hard I had to sit down. If you ever find a document with your own employee number on it, you don't verify it, you don't mark it, you don't put it in hold. You leave it in inbound, and you call the number on the wall, and you wait. And under that, in the notebook man's failing hand at the very end of his diary, don't call the number on the wall. I didn't call the number on the wall. I had 2 warnings, one telling me to call and one, written later, telling me not to, both from people who hadn't lasted. And when your only guides are the dead, you've learned to read the order they died in. The man who said call the number went first. The note saying don't call came after. I trusted the later note. I think that's the one genuinely smart thing I did in that whole building. If it was smart, if it wasn't just luck, if there's a difference at the end of a thing like this. What I did instead was take the folder. I took my own file with my own death date in it, and I didn't leave it in inbound, and I didn't put it in hold, and I didn't call the number, and I didn't accept the move to the back rooms. I did the only thing I'd never tried in 14 weeks. The thing Patrice had warned about in a different context, the thing that gets you noticed. I tried to make 2 things disagree. The whole machine ran on agreement, the typing and the original matching, the slip and the document agreeing. I had a document, my file, my slip, number 6, the date 3 weeks out, and I had reality, which was me, alive, sitting in the chair, as long as I let them agree, as long as I let the date arrive and find me where the file said I'd be. The machine would close the loop the way it had closed it on the second car's owner every single night. But if I could make reality disagree with the file before the date, if I could not be where I was supposed to be, not be number 6, not be at Belmont at all, then maybe the slip would sit in inbound, unverified. A discrepancy nobody initialed, a name that appears in error. Maybe. I didn't know. Nobody back there said no. But I thought about Carol Heddle and how flagging her clean document had only moved her around inside the machine, and I thought, the difference is she didn't leave. The flag stayed in the building. I have to take the document and leave the building and never let it be verified. The file can only finish if it stays where the work is done. So I stole my own death. I put the folder under my coat. I took the notebook, mine, the one that wrote itself, because I couldn't stand to leave it for the next 17 to find the way I'd found the last man's. And because Adler had said they get funny if it leaves. And I wanted for once to make them funny, to take something out of the building that the building wanted to keep. And I want to tell you, I walked out clean. But the building doesn't let you walk out clean. That's the whole thing I've been trying to say. As I crossed the floor toward the front door with the folder under my coat, the keypad on the back doors beeped. Not Adler's pattern, a longer one. And the doors opened. Both of them, wide, which I'd never seen. And the smell came out, the hallway smell. The wet wool and dust and skin, but much stronger, a wall of it. And beyond the doors, it wasn't a hallway. I'd always assumed it was a hallway. It was a room, a big room, bigger than the building should have been able to hold. And it was full of desks, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, going back further than the light reached. And at every desk, a person was writing. Heads down, hands moving, the scratch of pens like rain on a roof. And the nearest one, close enough that I could see, was writing in old ink on a ledger sheet. In a tight blue-black slant, I knew. The notebook man's hand. And he didn't look up. None of them looked up. They just wrote. And I understood that this was where everyone went. This was the back rooms. This was where the second car's owner was, and where Patrice was now, and where Coombs meant when he said safer. This was the typing, the endless making of originals to match a file that never stopped being added to. And there was an empty desk near the front, the closest one, with a chair pulled out, and a folder on it, and a pen. I didn't go to the desk. That's it. That's the whole heroism of my story. I didn't go to the desk. I stood there long enough that I could have, long enough to feel the pull of it. The way you feel the pull of finally lying down when you've been tired for weeks. Because that's what it offered. It offered an end to the not knowing and the going back and the math. You'd just sit down and write and never have to read another name, because you'd be the one making them. Adler appeared in the doorway, between me and the room. And he looked at me, and he wasn't flat anymore. His face had something in it I'd never seen there. And he said very quietly, "Go, while they think you're coming in. Go now, and don't ever say my name to anybody." And he stepped aside, out of the doorway, into the room, toward the empty desk. And he sat down in it. And he picked up the pen. And that's how Adler got moved up and out. That's the raise. That's the promotion. A man sitting down at a desk in a room that shouldn't fit inside a building so that I could get to a door. And I took it. I took the door. I ran. I'm not proud of running, but I ran. Out into the rain and the gravel and my truck. And behind me, I heard the keypad beep and the locks catch. Both doors. And I drove, and I didn't look in the mirror because there was nothing in the mirror I could afford to see. I never went back. I didn't call Dell. I didn't call the number on the wall. I let the phone ring. 2 days later, a number I didn't know, area code I didn't recognize. And I let it go to voicemail, and the voicemail was 9 seconds. Of the sound of pens on paper, that scratch, that rain on a roof scratch. And then a click. I deleted it. It called again the next week, and I let it ring out, and didn't even check. It stopped after a while, mostly. The date in the folder came and went. I spent it in a motel 2 states over, paid cash, didn't tell anyone where I was. Sat on the bed with a folder and my notebook and watched the clock go past the minute the date became the next date. And nothing happened. I'm still here. I made the file disagree with reality, and I'm still here, which I think means it worked. Which I think means the slip is still sitting in an inbound tray at Belmont. Unverified. A discrepancy nobody will initial because the only one who could is gone. I think. I don't know. That's the deal I made, remember? The not knowing is what I bought. The truck's paid off now. I tell people, when they ask what I did before this, that I had an office job that didn't work out. And that's true enough that I can say it without my face doing anything. I've got a notebook habit still, can't break it. But I buy a different kind now. The bound kind with the sewn spine, not the cheap spiral. And I check it every morning, every single morning. The first thing, before coffee. And so far, there's never been a line in it I didn't write. So far. I check the handwriting too. My own handwriting. I check that it still leans the way it always leaned, and not the way his leaned, the tight blue-black slant. And so far it does, mostly. Though some mornings I'm not as sure as I'd like to be. And the not being sure is its own kind of life sentence. Checking your own hand against your own memory of your own hand at a kitchen table while the coffee goes cold. I kept the kid's number. The brother, the one looking for his sister, the one I fed to the hold tray to get the question off my desk. I copied it off the yellow form before I left. I don't know why. Guilt, I guess. The cheapest kind. The kind that collects evidence of itself. I've never called it. I tell myself I've never called it because I don't know what I'd say. And that's true. But the truer thing is, I'm afraid of two answers, and I can't tell you which one I'm more afraid of. I'm afraid no one will pick up, and I'm afraid someone will, and that it'll be his voice, sounding fine, sounding normal, asking who's calling, with no idea his sister ever existed. Because that's the other thing the place could do, I think. The thing I never let myself fully understand. It didn't just take people. It took the space where they'd been, smoothed it over, made the file, and the world agreed that there had never been any disagreement at all. A man came in out of the rain looking for a sister. If I called that number and he answered, and he'd never had a sister, then I'd know what I'd really done by putting his name in the tray. And I'd have to carry that instead of the not knowing, and I'm not strong enough. I've established that. I'm a man who keeps it comfortable maybe over a bad fact every single time. So the number sits in my new notebook, on the last page, where I won't open to it by accident. And the folder sits in a safe deposit box because I couldn't burn it and couldn't keep it in the house. And the voicemails come every few months, the pens on paper ones, and I delete them. And I've stopped telling myself they'll stop. And every morning, I check my own handwriting against my own memory. And every morning, it's mine. And one of these mornings, I'm afraid it won't be. I'm afraid I'll open the bound notebook, and there'll be a line in a slant that isn't quite mine anymore. Something practical. Something helpful, something a slightly older and more frightened version of me would write to warn a younger one. And it'll say, count your stack, or it'll say, he's going to come in. Don't help him. Or it'll just say, the way the last man's last line said it, small and pressed hard into the page from very close. The thing I already know and have known since I stood in that doorway and didn't sit down at the desk. Which is that I didn't get out. Not really. Nobody gets out. I just got a longer commute. The work is still being done. The file is still being added to. There's a new man at Station 17 by now, matching shapes, not reading names, telling himself the count was wrong at the start of the shift. And somewhere in a room that's bigger than the building that holds it, there's an empty desk near the front with a chair pulled out, and a folder on it, and a pen. And they're patient. That's the last thing I learned about them. They are so much more patient than I am. And they have my number. And the truck is paid off. And there's nothing left that I need badly enough to make me drive out Route 9. Except that some nights, when the voicemail comes and I hear that scratch before I delete it, I notice that I don't delete it as fast as I used to.